Back on MorningLine, thanks for joining us. Professor Marc Schwerdt with us from Lipscomb University. He's a professor of political science, international studies, and that's what we're talking about this morning. Yeah. Thanks for coming on. And
Thank you.
We've got Grady that waited through the break. Grady, good morning.
Good morning, Nick and Professor Schwerdt.
Thank you.
You know, I don't know why North Korea would ever believe anything. We've torn up agreements with Iran and all the other agreements we've made, and he can't even keep up with what he told Haley Jackson over the weekend to, verify what she said on Sunday, on Monday. And plus, he can't even keep up with his vows with his wife. So, we need to protect, our interests, but who is going to protect Kim Jong-un, when he goes in with negotiating with Trump? Because Trump can't keep his word on anything. It's twice as many nerve endings in between the eye and the brain as the ear and the brain, and I don't believe Trump can read anything and understand it. Now, I ain't got most of y'all's contracts this morning.
Well, and even if the president does stick to his guns, you'll have to take him at his word. I mean, that doesn't make me wonder, as I asked you before, what the heck? I mean, what kind of ironclad agreement assuring his sovereignty if he gives up his nuclear weapons is going to last even, hey, there could be a new president or a new Congress that changes things.
Sure.
I just can't buy that he will say, I'm going to give them all up. And even if he does, I'm going to think he's got some of it stashed in a mountain somewhere. So I just wonder what's going to come out of this?
Well, I think that what you get is, again, I think the connection here is with China. If China insists that he do this, he at least has to publicly say, this is what we have and we will allow inspections because here's what we want. And, the way the world is right now, the fact that China and the United States, roughly equal, especially in that region, and the interests of other countries, nobody wants to go to war. Nobody wants to have a North Korea that has to be rebuilt from the ground up, and also they don't want one that creates all sorts of chaos, because this is kind of always the thing. It's not just about the nuclear weapons themselves, it's also about the potential chaos if there was an invasion or the collapse of the North Korean regime of, okay, what do you do with 23 million desperate people? Yeah. They're going to come streaming across the borders, which means both China and South Korea. China doesn't want to deal with, a couple of 3, 4, 5 million refugees, plus having to then send in troops to maintain order because they don't want the South Koreans or us moving up into take over North Korea. This goes back to that earlier discussion where I said, China doesn't want a reunified Korea.
Right.
And so it's in their interest to make sure that this occurs.
So if this occurs, then there is
basically North Korea, let's not talk about them as an equal.
Okay, you're right.
That's one of the things that kind of gets lost in this, that we're right here together because it's a one-on-one conversation. Well, when really it's them down here, they have fewer options than we do. That's why they're stuck with the nuclear weapons. Give them a veto, but it also doesn't give them any sort of real room for maneuver, because they can't negotiate on anything else. They're too poor. They're too. They're not involved in anything else.
Right.
And so that isolation, that's where it works against them. And that's why China is so key to this, and also the willingness of South Korea to engage with, but not give away too much to the North Koreans, perhaps, and the desire to reunify at some point. I mean, you can put this reunification plan into, okay, in 10 years, here's what we'll do. In 20 years, here's what we'll do. I mean, those kinds of timelines are attractive in the sense of being so far off, but also in some ways, like your caller was saying, there's also a little bit of meaninglessness to them. But if we do get this kind of guarantee, he talks about the next president. Well, the next president, if North Korea doesn't have nuclear weapons and they're behaving, who cares about North Korea?
Right.
They're a side issue. They're only a central issue for us because of the nuclear question.
Let's go to Jewel. Jewel, good morning. Hey, Jewel, are you there?
Top of the morning, my friend.
Top of the morning. What's up, my friend?
Glad to see y'all up and about. When the Americans pulled out in '53 over there in Korea, we probably would have won North Korea as well had not China overran.
was, if you will. So there was a withdrawal. And through the years, time and again, we've tried to help North Korea. You know, sending them grain and such as that for their starving millions, pitiful folks. And ain't nothing changed. How can anyone put much stock in a man who's killing his own kind, his own flesh and blood, who's killing and murdering his generals that's been in there and much older and wiser than he? It's, I hope and pray, if you will, some kind of positive conclusion will come out of all of this, because it's a terrible precipice that we're sitting on right now. You all have a beautiful day.
Too.
Yeah, it's a grim picture.
It is. But you know, I mean, that element of trust is certainly something that has to be developed.
Yeah.
But what we know is he can be ruthless when it comes to maintaining his position. And others can as well. The thing is, if he doesn't have to worry about his position, does that make him more willing to negotiate?
Yeah.
And that's the opening that seems to have arrived. He doesn't have to be a nice person.
Mm-hmm.
All he has to do is not threaten us. That's the message from the United States and Korea and Japan.
Yeah. But with those weapons, it's a threat.
It is.
Yeah.
There's no way around that.
And he thinks he needs them because he's worried what happened to Gaddafi could happen to him, and what happened to Saddam Hussein could happen to him.
Sure. I mean, and that wasn't irrational, especially in like 2003 when North Korea, Iran, and Iraq were the axis of evil.
Yeah.
So under the Bush administration, it was a rational thing to do. Okay, we need to give ourselves the nuclear weapons, or at least keep them, so that we don't end up like Saddam. Or if you're Iran and you're pursuing nuclear weapons, that's the other side of this, because they're another X factor in this.
That's right.
And they're in a position to be much more self-sufficient than North Korea's. Iran doesn't depend on anybody like North Korea does on China. So North Korea is the more open to being pressured.
Yeah. Well, and that's, well, we'll see how this plays out. Let's get down a little bit, and we can take more calls on North Korea if you'd like, but just more domestically, you know, as always, an awful lot on the president's plate. And just, you know, as we see things play out, the Russia investigation, nothing significantly new on that front, but the James Comey book comes out, and, you know, the back and forth on that. Politically speaking, for the president, I imagine, you know, doing this North Korea thing for him is a nice distraction away from some of these other headaches he's dealing with domestically.
Well, I mean, it depends on which frame you're kind of looking at these things through, what lens you're using. North Korea is substantive.
Right, exactly.
The back and forth with Comey, it's just, you can call it partisan, you can call it whatever you like. But in the long term, it means nothing.
Yes, I mean, it makes a little buzz when the book's released and the interviews, and then the president responds to some things. But just like that first book that came out, it just will eventually, it's just going to fade away.
Sure it will.
And,
that's pretty typical. I mean, whenever you looked at the experience of the Reagan administration or the Clinton administration or the Bush administration or the Obama administration, whenever somebody left and then published a book, it creates a little bit of, you know, insight into what's going on here. But presidents can overcome that. Okay. For the most part, the only reason these people were important was because they had some sort of relationship to the president himself. Now, Comey's a little bit different in that he was FBI director.
Yeah, the author of the first book, what's the first one that came out that caused all that?
You're talking about the Sound and Fury or something like that?
That one I really wasn't interested in, because, for one reason, because of what you just said. I think the guy who wrote it said he spent all of maybe 15 minutes with the president and then talked to everyone else. I'm like, you know what? I don't know what was true or what wasn't, but you're right. For me, there's a little more gravitas to Comey because of where he came from.
Yeah, a little bit more gravitas, but also the way it ends, the way he himself has kind of characterized everything. It just doesn't seem to be anything that's really going to have much legs to it. There's no new revelations. Okay, it confirms to some people what they already believed about Trump. It confirms to other people what they already believed about Comey.
Yeah,
it doesn't change minds.
Let's take a break on that note. When we come back, more of our conversation in our final segment right after this.
Trish, thank you.